The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
Good morning, everybody. You're watching Squawk Europe with Karen Cho and myself, Steve Sedgwick, and these are your headlines this Tuesday morning. So, the US reportedly pushing countries to give their best offers on trade talks by tomorrow, as July 8th's reciprocal tariff deadline looms on the horizon. Well, the EU says officials will push for tariff cuts in key meetings with the United States this week, repeating the threat of countermeasures if a deal is not agreed. The German Steel Association head Gunnar Groebler tells this very channel levies are also hitting American companies.
Cutting off those 14% imports will certainly also have a negative impact on the US steel industry and the US industry as such.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer pledges to make the country battle ready, promising the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War.
When we are being directly threatened by states with advanced military forces, the most effective way to deter them is to be ready. And frankly, to show them that we're ready. To deliver peace through strength.
A good headline makes our view. Good morning, Karen Cho.
Good morning.
A good headline makes our viewers stand up, and let alone the anchors themselves. And I was just listening to your headline and reading one of mine. I'm thinking, what the blooming heck's going on? So hang on, the defence one. Let's get this over and done with quickly. Make the country battle. Shouldn't we be battle ready anyway? I mean, I'm not being funny, but we haven't trusted the Russians militarily since 1945, and there was a brief rapprochement in the early 90s. But the fact is, this defence review, and I've read loads about it already. As you know, it's one of my pet topics as well. It's basically saying, yeah, we're not fit for purpose. That worries me, because if we're not going to be fit for purpose until the mid-2030s, we're a long way to go.
Well, coming back to what markets are going to do with being battle ready, don't forget there's already a concern on bond markets, at least, that the UK is spending beyond its means. It's just one country and a series of others from the United States to Japan that the bond vigilantes are taking another look at. And the multi-year spending review next week from the Chancellor Rachel Reeves could be the next stop. So if we see stepped up defence spending, what will that do again to long-term debt?
You know the answer, don't you? Don't worry about this one.
And it goes into a different category, doesn't it?
No, you're going to pay for it.
Right.
You're going to pay for it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pay for it. You're going to pay for it if you pay British taxes, because we all know that something's coming in the autumn budget. And I think we all need to go into Nissan huts and have our tin hats on, because it's going to be horrible for us middle class, middle to whatever earner taxpayers. It's going to be horrible. The other headline, this is great. My top headline. Trump apparently saying, yeah, give us your best offers by tomorrow. Best offer? It's not like a piece of real estate. It's not an auction on a bit of Manhattan property. Did you see the list of reciprocal products that the EU listed? It was about a month ago, wasn't it? There were, chicken products, there are about 500 there. Everything, there are hundreds and hundreds of products on the list as well. So give us your best offer. I mean, we're talking about aircraft products, motor vehicles, alcohol, agri-food, fish, electrical equipment, machinery, health-related products, and plastics as well. That's just the overall. The subsectors go into pages and pages and pages. Give us your best offer.
Yeah, your best and final offer.
A little bit simplistic, got to be honest.
On those chicken wings, let's get the best and final offer. I think we all thought real estate when we saw that terminology, but I've got to say
Do you like chicken wings?
Not really.
Oh, I can't stand
Now,
it.
I've got to say the uncertainty, though, is key, and you're hearing it
People
from
want
so many
fiddly
different
chicken
quarters.
wings.
Well, it's a bit messy. You've got to really get your hands in there. But the reality is the uncertainty is kicking into gear for a lot of manufacturers, a lot of supply chains, and if we've got a timeline that is pressed here now from Trump, that is welcome. I saw one quote this morning that Trump is the key to sentiment from here. So we seem to have traded away to the upper ranges, but now from here.
Who was that genius that said Trump is the key to sentiment from here? I can only concur and agree with these people, but chicken wings is a bit like trade deals, isn't it? They're very fiddly and quite unsatisfying by the end of it.
away.
The Trump administration is giving trading partners, here we go, until Wednesday to table their best offer for any prospective trade deal. That's according to a draft seen by Reuters. The document issued by the US Trade Representative, that's Jameson Greer, isn't it, asks countries to provide their proposed tariffs and quotas for US products, including industrial and agricultural goods. I think the EU's already had a look at that, hasn't it? On legal questions surrounding the tariffs, the letter says not to assume these so-called reciprocal tariffs will be suspended. The levies are expected to remain in effect as the White House appeals last week's ruling by the US Court of International Trade, which found several of the president's tariffs to be unlawful. So you've got the... Here's another interesting quote. I listened to a great podcast looking at US politics the other day, and it was looking at it from a US point outwards rather than a Euro point inwards. So I quite like the idea of it. It said, this supposed queue of countries rushing to the White House, rushing to DC to get a deal done. Actually, a lot of people are saying, actually, there isn't a rush of queue. The Chinese aren't rushing, the EU's not rushing, a lot of these other countries aren't rushing because they can see what it's also doing to the US economy. And we can come back to the ISM data a little bit later on, and the manufacturing and the construction and all the other data we got this week, and saying, actually, who's the pressure on? Because this is Trump versus the rest of the world, or the administration versus the rest of the world. But actually, a lot of the rest of the world has got perfectly stable trading relationships with, fun enough, the rest of the world. So whilst it's 100% of the trading relationships for the United States, it's actually a 10% or 20% or a 30% for those other nations. So whilst, yes, of course, they want to get US trade deals, they want this behind them as well. The fact is, for a lot of nations, it's less important than it is for the United States.
Well, I think you've touched on something, and that's the reality behind this pressure point, trying to get other countries to get their skates on to speed up the negotiations, because they're seeing there is a lag here in terms of the ability to do deals. And don't forget this whole court case. If it goes against Trump, they have to use some other legality here, some other way to get policy through. It becomes more and more complicated, but it could also look like Trump is not holding all the cards when it comes to those negotiations. The other point I was going to make here was where we started about the link to debt markets, because these tariffs were designed to bring in more revenue. And originally what was the number, $600 billion each year was what Peter Navarro was quoting. The reality is that Republican lawmakers are also looking to what these tariffs will bring in as they talk about the big beautiful bill and the ramifications for the debt profile down the track. And I think, as we've seen, again, bond markets are concerned about US debt, the sort of premium that is required to hold longer term debt. So the tariff negotiation, very, very key to the long term fiscal position of the United States as well. We're going to press on and take a look at those US markets. And we mentioned that sentiment seems to have just started to wane. And you could see yesterday very stilted levels on the Dow. Not much of a trade, somewhat cautious, even though it lent green. 0.4 firmer on the S&P 500. The Nasdaq was a little bit firmer. So again, some of those tech plays closely watched on markets still at this point. And if you looked at one of the better performing sectors, it was away from the tech sector. It was actually energy. You had a bounce of just over 1% there. In terms of what we're seeing on the dollar trade, we have dropped again. The trade uncertainty very much impacting the greenback level. 6-week lows is where we've been travelling to. There's a morning session though. We've got euro sterling just giving back a little bit of territory, and dollar trying to claw back some of that lost ground that it's had. But the level we're seeing on euro dollar, 114.20 at this hour. Let's push on to treasuries, and the yield we're seeing, the long end particularly key at this point, and we'll start at the 30. You can see we're travelling very close to that 5% handle, about 6 basis points shy at that 4.94% level. The 10-year treasury, again, we're just off the 4.5% mark. What we've heard too has been a lot of concerns around this long-term position from a lot of commentators. Now, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon is warning America's spiraling deficit is becoming an increasingly big worry. In an interview with Fox Business, Dimon said if foreign investors no longer have faith in US institutions, it would damage the entire system.
People vote with their feet, and they're going to be looking at the country, the rule of law, the inflation rates, the central bank policies, what they want to hedge and what they don't want to hedge. And so those rates aren't set by central banks. They can affect them. They can twist them. They can do things to make you feel more comfortable, which they should do. But, if people decide that the U.S. dollar isn't the place to be, yeah, you could see, spreads gap out, credit spreads gap out, and that will become a problem.
I'm pleased to say Bilal Hafiz joins us now, the CEO of Macro High. Bilal, thank you very much for joining us. We've been watching very closely. It was a flat auction recently for US debt. We've seen issues in Japan around how investors are feeling about holding Japanese debt given the long-term liabilities. You had in your research, rates markets are sending a clear message. The lunch of low yields is over. What gives you the sense that we are well and truly done? That's not just a little warning signal here.
I mean, one big reason is that every country in the world pretty much is saying that they're going to grow their deficits. You know, everyone now is talking about increasing defense spending. Germany's obviously removed its limits on fiscal. And so the big drive, the consensus around the world is more and more fiscal. And that's happening at the same time as we still have lingering inflation pressures. So it's not as if inflation's gone. So you don't have the Fed or the central bank backstop to support bonds. So I think this is a new paradigm that we're in. And I think we're going to have choppy waters for bonds going forward.
We all sat through the last financial crisis, and we saw then the consequences of that, the aversion to risk, aversion to spending, particularly a number of frugal countries in Europe having a position that spending is bad and very much need to stay in your lane when it comes to the amount that you plough into resources of a year. What leads us to the point where we end up with another debt crisis, another financial crisis? Is that in the making now? Is that what we're actually seeing in terms of these spending initiatives, even if they are supposedly for good?
I think yes. And one big reason I say that is in the run-up to the global financial crisis, the biggest growth in debt was in the private sector, people's mortgages and so on, which led to the blow-up. This time, since the global financial crisis, the biggest increase in debt has been on the government's balance sheet. So around the world, government debt has just exploded everywhere. Households have actually been relatively conservative. So the source of risk is on the government's balance sheet. So that tells me the blow-up will happen, linked to government debt in some form or another. The exact nature of the crisis is unclear, but we will see some kind of crisis.
And yet, Bilal, lovely to see you, by the way. In a world where we have central banks who can buy as much debt as possible, we have treasuries who can print as much debt as they want as well. Scott Bessent's right. The US isn't going to default. There will always be a buyer of last resort, depending on the price as well. Why shouldn't I, as an investor now, fill my boots with government debt, despite everything you said? Given the fact that there will always be the central bank to pick up the paper, and the fact is there is a regulating mechanism in the markets will stop it going too far or stop the politicians going too far, as indeed we saw quite recently with the retreat from Trump on some of the worst successes of the tariffs when the bond market got a bit hot.
Well, two things. First up, if we do have inflation, which we haven't had in a long time, then central banks...
Well, you say that. We're only going back 3 years.
Yeah,
we kind of lost Biden an election, so we have had inflation quite recently.
We have had inflation, but importantly, during that time, we didn't have a fiscal crisis or the prospect of a fiscal crisis. That happened with the backdrop that the fiscal sort of blew out because we had a shutdown. Now, going forward, if we have a scenario where you have loose fiscal and you have a central bank that's not willing to cut rates or do QE to back that, then you have a problem. Because you have to remember when Biden did his stimulus, the Fed was hiking. It was saying, okay, we're going to hike. We're not going to buy bonds. We're going to do quantitative tightening. So that's one issue.
Okay.
The other point is in terms of investors, should you buy bonds or not? You could go into cash instead of bonds. So that puts massive pressure on the long end of the curve. So curve steepening dynamic.
Okay, given everything you just said about the relative responsibility of corporates at the moment and their debt issuance and not being too bad, and individuals, and the profligacy of governments as well, the model's on its head. So the safe haven is good, high quality, blue chip, cash flow, fantastic companies, and actually bonds are a riskier asset now. So we should basically need to completely change our psyche on where we invest and where the risk is.
On one level, yes. On the other level, everything's benchmarked off the government curve. So if the government curve blows up, then no matter, even if credit spreads are tight, credit spreads will also blow out. But there is some truth in what you're saying in the sense that corporates with strong balance sheets...
During the financial crisis, some of the biggest blue chips traded at a discount to the underlying sovereign. I'm pretty sure I remember.
It did. It's true.
I remember when I was seeing the
Nestle,
list of companies that were being bought, likes of Nestle, were trading at a discount to the underlying sovereign bonds.
Yeah, there could be instances of that. Yeah, absolutely.
So
you're right.
So sorry to be a pedant in going into the weeds on this one, but it's a great debate.
Yeah.
Why necessarily will credit spreads blow out for those companies that you and I just mentioned if indeed the credit worthiness of the sovereign were to blow out? It doesn't necessarily mean that those blue chips will blow out as well.
That's a good point. I mean, one thing I would say is that what's very likely to happen if we are in this sort of fiscal blowout scenario is that we could be in a recession by that point. And then when you have a recession, default rates go up, and credit spreads are incredibly tight right now. They're probably tighter than we're sort of...
yeah, but look at the default rates. They're not that high, given everything's been thrown at it.
But if you have a recession, then the default rates...
This is amazing, this conversation.
Yeah, but if you have the recession, then the default rates start to kick in, and then you have all these knock-on effects. So then I'd be kind of somewhat concerned about credit. But you're right, high-quality credit will probably do okay. Whether it goes, a negative to the sovereign is less clear. But I think, one would be cautious on anything with duration in that scenario.
Well, I can tell you one environment where nobody cares about credit, and that is when an economy is growing fairly rapidly. And there are all signs that revenue is pouring in through every door. And the reality is Trump has slammed some of those doors shut because of the tariff situation. It's making everybody more nervous about investing. The demand for holding longer-term debt that premium investors are also requiring. And this is linked to what we're seeing on the tariff situation as well. What do you need to see very quickly on the tariff front to make a difference in terms of the economic trajectory for this year?
I mean, the most important thing is we need stability. We basically need whatever the tariff, rates are. We just need them to be set and that to be sort of done. Instead, what we're having is this constant up and down, delay, not delay, and that's a big problem for investors or corporates, for anyone. So even if the tariff was 30%, say, or 40%, whatever it is, just set it and keep it constant. The problem is
it's good that Trump is demanding best and final offers.
Well, it's good in one sense if it was credible. The problem is it's not credible because he says that and then he reneges on that. He goes backwards, and so every trading partner will say, "I'll just wait," because he always changes his opinion.
I'm going to squeeze one. Why is Mr. Hassett? Why is Speaker Johnson? Why is the administration wrong? Why aren't they right about the growth levels? And actually, I understood what Speaker Johnson was saying when he said, well, "You're saying we're only going to grow at 1.8% over the next 10 years. We've never grown at that lower level as well." I mean, why aren't all these policies going to create growth?
Well, one reason is that the reason the US had high growth in the last 20, 30, 40 years was partly because you didn't have tariffs. You had an environment where the US was able to access every single market in the world. The US was top dog and everything was working to the US advantage. What the US is doing now is it's basically saying, we're going to change the global system. That worked for us. The US has had higher growth than Europe, than Japan, than every other country in the world. GDP per capita is higher than everyone else in the world. The system has worked for the US in the last 30, 40 years. The problem for the US has been income inequality has grown, and there's been the China issue. So there's two specific issues they've had to deal with. Income inequality is an internal issue for them on how you distribute profits and wages. That's just the domestic issue. The China one, they have a policy to contain China, but you don't blow up the world system to try to help them.
Yeah, well, it's played well for their voters, hasn't it? Interesting to see the self-harm measures. Bilal, thank you so much for joining us. Bilal Hafiz with us, the CEO of Macro Hive. While the taco trade dominated headlines last week, a new acronym is gaining market momentum. You can head online to CNBC Pro to find out more about the anywhere but the USA trade.
An acronym's got to be good. It's got to sound good. What's this one? Ubuntu.
No, I'm not saying this one on air.
Why are you not saying on air?
Just take the start of every one of those letters and it gets you to a fairly punchy acronym, to use that word. There are, of course, other acronyms out there that also look somewhat distasteful.
Well, I'll say it. Am I being really dumb here and this is going to be viral? Ubuntu.
That's not what it is.
ABTU.
Right. We'll come back to this. Now, ahead on the show, South Korean voters go to the polls to elect a new president. We'll have the latest next. Plus, Elon Musk is back to business with his AI firm XAI launching a $300 million share sale and a move which could value the company at more than $100 billion. We'll discuss later this hour. And the South by Southwest Festival kicks off in London. We're joined by the CEO of Aveva to discuss AI and stability, as well as the European tech space. Don't miss that conversation at 9:30 BST. fair to say a big lingering question as to how China is weathering the trade war. And the latest data rolling across today is Chinese factory activity has contracted for the first time in 8 months as the impact of US trade tariffs start to hit the sector. The Caixin manufacturing PMI reading fell to 48.3 in May, below expectations. So perhaps the fade after the inventory stockpiling that saw, of course, the factories very busy.
Yeah, and that's been noted in the ISM as well. We can come back to that later on in the States. Right, South Korean voters go to the polls today to choose their next president in a snap election triggered by the impeachment of the former president, Yoon Suk-yeol. Sherry, of course, as ever, is our point person in Seoul. Sherry, it's a really, really important election in so many ways. Just talk us through the key issues.
So I don't think this is going to be really the point where South Korea starts healing, because it has been chronically deeply divided politically, ideologically, but at least we will get a leadership, a proper president, a proper cabinet. It's really the small things that South Korea is asking for at this point in time, because it's been very, very messy 6 months since the early December martial law declaration by the former president. And since then, we didn't really have a proper government in hand. So that's what we're trying to change here. So South Korea doing the early presidential election, the voter turnout so far close to 60%. So pretty high turnout here. And I think that really says a lot of things. And of course, this is a highly politically charged country to begin with. But of course, because of the martial law, because of the political uncertainty for the last 6 months or so, that a lot of people are turning out to cast their ballots, because a lot is riding on this for sure. And let's not forget the geopolitical complexities that we're all navigating in 2025. I think in the big picture, the question seems to be whether this is going to be really the moment where South Korea decides, makes a choice between the U.S. and China. And that has been somewhat a perpetual debate every time we go through this election. But because it's a 2025 and because of this ongoing trade war between the U.S. and China, and really, frankly, the Trump administration versus the rest of the world, I think that's really the proper question that we are asking at this point. Guys?
Sherry, let me ask you about the shadow of that martial law that was declared, because when we look at one of the contenders, Kim, being, of course, the Labour minister when the former president declared that martial law in December, do you think there has been any lingering issues around his association with that martial law?
There is definitely a big dent coming from the martial law saga. And in fact, Kim Moon-soo had to apologize time and again during his campaign for the declaration of martial law, because he is from the same party. But at the same time, what he's saying is that the other guy coming from the other political party is going to be worse in a sense, because Lee Jae-myung is going to be coming from a very powerful party which has the majority at the National Assembly. Quite interesting you point that out, because we've seen some of the former presidents, the familiar names like Park Geun-hye, Lee Myung-bak, as well as Moon Jae-in. They all came out to the public eyes, throwing their support, really helping out with the marketing of these different campaigns. But Yoon Suk-yeol was not very welcomed to the conservative, to join the Conservative Party's campaign because of the martial law related drama.
Excellent coverage, and we will see you again a little bit later on. Karen, a couple of years ago, there was a big debate about whether you should let the admirals, the air vice marshals and the generals anywhere near procurement, because there is a long-term understanding that they will always ask for new kit. They will always ask for more stuff. And whether it's relevant in the 21st century, post-Cold War, back into Cold War scenario, remains to be seen as well. So trusting, for instance, the admirals to show what's right for the Royal Navy has proved, should we say, contentious at least. We have these great big aircraft carriers now. They cost a combined £7-8 billion sterling. But guess what? we can't afford the aircraft to put on these aircraft carriers. They were supposed to be a statement of British power around the world as well. I think it's the HMS Queen Elizabeth and the HMS Prince of Wales as well. And quite frankly, a lot of that money, a lot of experts are saying, could be used better in the 21st century on drones, on cyber, on these new type submarines that we need to defend ourselves as well. So it's extraordinary. If you take away the power perhaps from these leaders of military, who are probably quite brilliant military tacticians, but probably not good on the best on the procurement, then you might get a spending review which is fit for the 21st century.
Yeah, I take your point. The most qualified people at the front line of defence would obviously want the best in business that they can order. But there's another element here, isn't there, where they're ordering from and who has the capabilities of producing that equipment because of the GDP multiplier. So no doubt the UK needs to think about being able to produce some of this equipment itself so it gets the economic benefit these days.
Which I think is going to happen. It seems the likes of Babcock, the likes of BAE Systems will be beneficiaries from the UK, which needs to spend around £68 billion in order to modernise its military. Bear in mind, we're not Germany. We haven't been practising on the parade ground with broom handles over the last 30 years. We have got a very world-respected British military. Anyway, this is all according to the highly anticipated Strategic Defence Review. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, stressing the need for strength as a form of deterrence. As part of its overhaul of the sector, the UK government has pledged to boost defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, with the ambition to raise that figure to 3% by 2034. The Prime Minister also outlined the shifting purpose of the UK's military.
We are moving to warfighting readiness as the central purpose of our armed forces. When we are being directly threatened by states with advanced military forces, the most effective way to deter them is to be ready. And frankly, to show them that we're ready, to deliver peace through strength.
Speaking to CNBC about the outcome of the Defence Review, the former Defence Secretary, and she also was a Royal Navy reservist, so she knows a thing or two about this, is Penny Mordaunt. She said that it's a false economy to say the UK can't invest in defence.
We can't afford not to do this. It sounds a massive increase, but in the scheme of the whole budget, it's not. And let's remember, this defence review is supposed to be a NATO-first defence review. It's very much focused on that immediate geography, Europe and the High North. And Europe itself, NATO itself, has been talking about the need to move to, in fact, one figure is 3.7% if it can't make any more efficiency savings through joint procurement. So, I mean, that's we're a very great distance away from that number at the moment. And if we don't invest in these capabilities, everything else we want to do is vulnerable. Our healthcare service, for example, vulnerable to cyber attack. So it's a complete false economy to say we can't afford to invest in these vital foundational capabilities.